Hi guys, Adrian here. Choosing yarn for a new project is one of the more enjoyable parts of knitting in my opinion. I think choosing the project itself, getting the equipment, picking the yarn, getting it all set up and ready to go is really fun. And it can be a straightforward process. For example, if you find a pattern that you love and it suggests a particular yarn that is available to you that you can buy or that you want to buy online, that's a pretty straightforward process. But say you find a pattern, you can't get your hands on the suggested yarn, or you've got a particular yarn in mind. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to get all the pieces to match together so that you're happy with the final finished object. Yarn selection is really important. It can make or break the project, and that's fine. You know, it can turn it into something completely different from the original. I think if we all jump on Ravelry, and I'll put links to the things that I speak about in the description box below so that you can find all of that goodness. If you search a particular pattern on Ravelry and click projects to see what everybody else has done in terms of that pattern, you can find some really contrasting finished objects that look completely different from, say, the original, which I think is a really great thing. And a lot of that has to do with, you know, your design elements that you put into it, the yarn that you select, the needles that you select, and the colors as well. So I think it's great, and there's endless possibilities out there. So this video is going to be all about yarn selection, focusing on the fiber content. So let's get started. Okay, when I started knitting, I knew there was wool and that there were synthetics. I had a really bad opinion of synthetic yarn. I think a lot of it was novelty yarn that my mum used to create scarves, similar to the Afghans for Afghans kind of thing. She was knitting scarves for homeless or for people who needed them overseas. And so she was knitting in bulk and getting a lot of, I guess, cheaper yarn so she could do more of them. There were a lot of the feather yarns and that sort of thing. So my opinion of acrylic yarn or synthetic yarn was really quite bad. And I know that that's not an uncommon perception out there, that acrylic yarn or artificial yarns are bad. It's not necessarily the case. And the other type of wool that I think every beginner knitter knows of is actually wool from a sheep. And that was pretty much all I knew going into it. I did come across other fibers such as linen or bamboo, silk, and I just thought, okay, these are all of varying expense. I can't afford them right now, and I don't necessarily know why I would want to. I haven't felt them, I haven't seen them in person, so I'm not quite sure what the difference is between them. But then as is my style, I decided I needed to research it and find out more and more. And I hit some websites, and I hit my knitting Bible more recently. And what I found with my research was that you can basically change the entire properties of the finished project by changing the kind of fiber that you buy. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, and I found it really interesting, the different properties of the different fibers. So to start off with, I guess I'll break them down into three categories. The first being animal fibers, second plant fibers, and the third synthetic fibers. These broad categories of fibers generally have the same properties or similar properties as each other, but there are always exceptions to the rule. So let's get started with animal fibers. General properties of animal fibers are that they are nice and warm, they keep heat close to the body, they can hold quite a lot of moisture, and they draw it away from the skin, so they're generally waterproof, water resistant, and finally they can felt. Now, felting is a property of animal fibers because they have scales, large scales that can interlock, kind of like Velcro. And this can be a good and a bad thing depending on what you want. If you have a particular yarn that you know felts very easily and you want to make a pair of house socks, might not necessarily be the best choice. I don't know, I'm not a sock knitter, but these are things, if you know the properties of the wool or the yarn that you're using, you can decide whether or not that's right for you. So let's get started with wool. Wool obviously is the most abundant of the animal fibers that we use as knitters. It's easy to produce. Sheep can produce quite a lot of it in a year. There are a lot of sheep in the world. I live in Australia. There are quite a lot of sheep in Australia. It's generally affordable. There are obviously higher end premium or boutique yarn companies that are a little bit pricier. As I said, with the general properties of animal fibers, it does keep you warm. And this is in contrast to plant fibers, which are a little more cooling. It can be water resistant or wick water away from the skin, and it can really hold quite a lot of moisture for its mass. But in saying that, animal fibers generally, when they're wet, they are weaker and more prone to breaking and deforming. Wool has memory, which means it can stretch out and then come back to its original dimensions and shape, which is really useful if you're making a garment that you don't want to deform and stretch out and become oversized and not useful for the person. And it is a renewable resource, given that the sheep don't die in the process of taking the wool. There have, however, been concerns about animal agriculture and the impact on the environment, and also there have been concerns about the welfare of sheep during the shearing process. It can be difficult to do research into yarns to find out information about how they are farmed, but it is something to keep in mind. I'm going to be showing you examples of each of the different kinds of fibers, and I'm going to take most of them, if not all of them, from Purl Soho's website. Link in the description box below. I love Purl Soho's website. They haven't asked me to do this. I just find that their online store is a complete fantasy store and they present their yarn in the best possible way. So I'm going to be showing you examples from their website. And for sheep's wool, I thought, what better than the Purl Soho Super Soft Merino. So cashmere wool traditionally is from the neck area of a cashmere goat. My understanding is that it can be taken from non-cashmere breed goats. The wool from the neck of any of the animals is usually softer and of a higher quality. Cashmere fibers are an extra fine fiber. Their micron count is between 16 and 19 microns. This means it's very, very fine, finer than sheep's wool, which makes it a lot softer. Cashmere wool has a natural crimp to it, which means when the fibers are all stacked on top of each other, they create a fuller and loftier appearance. A lot of sheep's wool will have natural crimp. One of the downsides of cashmere is that it actually is quite expensive. Cashmere goats can only produce around 4 to 6 ounces of wool per year, which is about 115 to 170 grams of wool per animal per year. And this can explain why it's a little expensive. An example of this is Jade Sapphire 2-ply cashmere. All right, let's talk about alpaca as our third example of animal fiber. So alpaca obviously comes from alpacas. It's even softer than cashmere, has very strong tensile fibers. It doesn't pill, and it does have an extra long staple. So a staple is how long a fiber length is. It can be short staple or long staple. Actually, there are different categories of staple length, and I think alpaca qualifies as an extra long staple at 3 to 4 inches in length. This means that when it is spun together, it can give a nice, tightly twisted, strong yarn, and it has an incredible sheen to it as well. So alpaca is great to use. So they are perfect for slightly warmer climates. Other general properties are that they are quite inexpensive, they are machine washable, easily produced, and quite durable. So let's look at our first and probably most common plant fiber, and that's cotton. Some of the properties of cotton is that it's very durable, very strong fiber. Any of you knitters out there will know that if you have a wool yarn and you need to break it off, you can just snap it with your hands. I wouldn't recommend trying that with cotton, as your hands will not win that interaction. It's very durable, it's quite inexpensive. It can have a beautiful sheen to it because of the processing, particularly Pima cotton, which has a longer staple length of up to 2 inches long, where the standard staple length for cotton is generally around 7/8 of an inch to an inch. In metric, that is up to 5 centimeters and up to 2.8 centimeters respectively. Cotton also has excellent color retention. It holds the yarn dye very well, and there's generally no bleed when washing the cotton. It is machine washable in most cases, which is great. It has an excellent drape, It doesn't have a lot of memory, so it can stretch out of proportion, and it isn't elastic. Of course, the way these fibers are processed and spun into yarns can make the properties seem a little more prominent or less prominent depending, but if you get a strand of cotton fiber and pull on it, you'll find that there isn't a lot of bounce there, so it doesn't have a lot of give. One of my favorite cottons, for an example, is the Cascade Yarns Ultra Pima cotton. This is incredibly shiny. It's so vibrant as well. The colors are amazing. The second plant fiber I'm going to talk about is linen, and I haven't actually knit with linen yet. This is a fiber that's derived from the flax plant. It's very breathable, very soft. There's very little pilling with linen. It does have a unique property that it is actually stronger when it's wet. Another unique property is that it softens the more it's washed. It is quite a luxurious fiber, and it's excellent for projects that you would want to wear in warmer climates and would have a lovely drape to them. An example is Oberg's Kalinka. I apologize if I said any of that wrong. The third plant fiber I'm going to talk about is bamboo, and bamboo is pretty much everywhere now. It's interesting in its production. It's not made from using bamboo fibers itself. It's actually created by using the pulp of the bamboo cellulose, which, if you've ever eaten celery and pulled apart the fibers of celery, you're basically looking at cellulose. Bamboo production can be a little bit tricky. It can be very different from one company to another. They can make biopolymers from bamboo, which is basically to break the cellulose down into units that they repeatedly stack one on top of another. And they can use chemicals to fill in gaps in this process so that it makes it a little bit plant fiber and a little bit synthetic fiber as well. And then there are others that just basically use the pulp with some chemicals to process it. One of the drawbacks of bamboo is that some of the chemicals used to process it are quite harsh and not very good for the environment. Even if bamboo itself is quite a green plant to produce, the processing afterwards may be a bit of an issue. It is very strong, has good moisture wicking properties, and it is very shiny. For an example, Habu Textiles dyed bamboo XS24B. For honorable mentions for the plant variety, we have rayon. Now, I didn't know until I was starting this, researching for this episode, that rayon was a naturally derived fiber or material. It actually it's similar to bamboo, and it comes from the cellulose pulp, but from any source at all. And then it is, processed with chemicals and is partially synthetic. So I found that really interesting. And if you've ever seen a Venn diagram with two circles and they have an overlapping part in the middle, I guess bamboo and rayon could exist in that space between plant fiber and synthetic yarns, just as silk could probably sit between animal fiber and plant fiber. So that brings us to the third category of yarn, which is synthetic. I think people are quite emotional about synthetic yarns, and they really fight against them and hate them, and they will sort of proudly call themselves yarn snobs or purists, which is fine. And I have to admit, I love nothing more than to knit with a pure wool. However, there are some yarns that are blended together with synthetics and different animal fibers that make the overall much stronger than the sum of its parts. But that's getting a little ahead of myself. So I'll start with the synthetics. And there are, again, three main ones that I'd like to talk about. So let's start off with the general properties of acrylic yarns. They're durable, easily produced, inexpensive, machine washable. This is always a great property. Nylon was developed by the DuPont Chemical Company in 1930 as a silk substitute. It's made of semi-aromatic polyamides. Chemicals. However, a little bit of research into nylon production reveals that generally the carbon footprint of nylon processing is about the same as wool production, and nylon literally has 1,000,001 uses. It has good dye take-up. It can be damage resistant, which means the fibers are not very easily broken. It can be quite fine or thin, very soft, very elastic. So it can mimic quite a lot of properties of wool. For an example, I've got Anzula cricket. Now, if you look closely, you'll find this does have quite a small proportion of nylon in it, but I feel that synthetic fibers do best when they are in a blend with other fiber types. Second, we've got acrylic. Now, acrylic is another polymer made from acrylonitrile. It was designed to mimic wool and cotton. Of all the fiber types that I've talked about, acrylic is the most resilient. So it is the most damage resistant of all the natural and artificial fibers that there are. It's a cool fabric. It holds color quite well. It's hypoallergenic. So if you have sensitive skin, this can be an excellent choice. It enhances blends, so with cashmere and wool, and it's very affordable. For an example, I've got Lion brand Heartland. Now this is one that I have used before, and I was astounded at how soft and wool-like this yarn actually was. It wasn't necessarily that cheap, mainly because it was imported from the US and sold at one of those local yarn stores or craft stores that I was telling you about that tend to be a little bit pricier anyway. But I will say it is the most flammable of the synthetic fibers, so no baby wear please. Although I know there are a lot of patterns out there that suggest that it's fine to use for baby wear. Personally, I would be worried. For an example, I've got Euro Baby Maypole. I think this looks amazing. The colors are incredible. So what's the final word on all of these fiber types? I think it's important to know what's out there and know the differences so that you can select the yarn with a little more knowledge behind you. Say you want to make an Aran style sweater that really could withstand some of the climate issues that happen over on the Aran Islands, then using a cotton is not going to cut it. Also, synthetic fibers have come a long way. I know from my experience of looking at my mum's yarns in the late 80s and the early 90s is that the synthetic yarns were of poor quality, but there are some excellent ones out there on the market today. So have a look. I think these ones in particular, you do have to get up close and personal with and actually feel them and see how they feel to the hand. Know that this is just a guide. Rules are made to be broken. Nothing is 100%. If you want to make an Aran sweater out of cotton because you live in Florida or you live in Queensland and it's warm there, then go ahead. No one's going to stop you. Okay, so that about wraps it up. Thank you for watching. I hope that was as useful to you as it was to me actually researching it. I know I learned a few things in the process. Feel free to continue the discussion below in the comments section. Let me know if there's anything that you think I missed or something that was a little inaccurate, and we can talk about it. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe for more content. I'm Adrian, and that was too much information. Bye.